Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I will show the process that I followed in painting the Dying Marat by Jacques-Louis David. And before that, if we haven't met before, my name is Katerina and I joined an art academy at 30. In this channel, I document very honestly my artistic journey, from every challenge, every breakthrough, and all the lessons I learned. Subscribe to my channel to make sure you're not missing any update. I decided to do this master copy after having been at the Louvre to see the exhibition of Jacques-Louis David. I was blown away by his works, by his composition, by his technique. I kept thinking and thinking about that after I came back. So what I decided to do to better understand the process that he followed, the technique that he followed, is that I looked back at the pictures that I took, and I normally take very detailed pictures where you can see every brushstroke, every transparency. And I chose the best one that I took. And that was this frame of the Dying Marat, and that's where I could better see everything that he did there. So I took that as a reference and I tried to paint it. What I really got fascinated by when I went to that exhibition was the really transparent layers of paint in the shadow and the very smooth and luminous paint in the lighter areas of the skin tones, for example. This was my very first master copy, and what I did here was trying to combine the method we are being taught at the academy with what I was seeing David was applying to his painting through the brushstrokes and transparency of the pictures that I had. It is a process in several steps that took me quite a few days, also to allow the paint to dry. While watching the videos, don't forget to note down in the comments any questions or any thought you have about the process that I followed. I normally answer to every comment. This is the process that I followed that I thought was kind of the correct one, but I'm really curious to see if you would have followed something different in the process, so please let me know if that's the case. That would obviously help me to learn new things. And now, let's begin. As a first step in this master copy, I started by drawing the subject in graphite. Drawing on paper and in graphite before starting to paint allows you to study the subject using a simpler medium before moving on to something more complex like oil painting. By drawing in graphite, you can familiarize yourself with the shapes, the values, and both the more detailed and looser area of the painting. Most importantly, you can correct the structure as many times as you want by erasing and redrawing, something that's not always allowed in oil painting. One important thing I want to mention here is that I never use a projector. I believe it's essential to learn how to draw using your eyes, and the more you draw, the easier it becomes to measure proportions, recognize shapes, and get things right from the first attempts. As you can see, I kept my reference image next to the easel on an iPad. Moreover, both in drawing and painting, I always work from dark areas toward lighter ones. This is how we are taught at the academy, and working this way gives you solid reference points for judging midtones and highlights. This was the second drawing session that I did the day after, and from the light you can probably tell it was a sunnier day here in Milan. Here we are approaching the final stages of the drawing. I intentionally didn't want to create a perfectly rendered drawing, the academic ones you see often on Instagram and online, which would have taken a very long time for me to do. As I mentioned before, I needed it mainly as a study to move on to the painting stage as soon as possible, but still in a well-prepared way. Of course, if you decide to do a master copy, you can absolutely prepare a highly finished drawing first. In this case, it simply wasn't my goal, and I was more interested in focusing on the painting itself. And that's why you can clearly see some pencil lines that I didn't fully unify. When I later compared my drawing with the reference image, I realized that I had made the nose slightly too large, which elongated the face a bit. Unfortunately, I noticed this when the painting was already at a very advanced stage, so I didn't correct it, as it wouldn't have significantly affected the painting or the objectives I had set for it. Ideally, this check should be done very early on during the structural phase of the drawing, so don't forget to double-check proportions at every stage. This is one of the risks of working without projection, of course. Once the drawing was finished, I traced it using tracing paper. Make sure to tape the tracing paper securely to your drawing to prevent it from moving and causing misalignment. As with everything, there are different schools of thought when it comes to tracing. I traced both the outlines and the shadow shapes, but I indicated the shadows using loose hatching so they would be distinguishable from the main outlines. Once the tracing was done, I applied color pigment to the back of the tracing paper. You might wonder why colored. Because if you use charcoal, which I generally avoid because it creates a lot of mess, or a dark pigment for example, you won't be able to see the trace lines clearly anymore. In this case, I used an oil sanguine, which works well for small scale transfers like this one. For larger paintings though, or if you have it available, I also recommend using pure pigment dust. It's much faster than coloring the entire tracing paper with a pencil. I didn't have any at home, so this was my solution. And now the preparation of the painting surface. The support I used for this painting was a wood panel that I prepared myself. The original painting is on canvas though, and if I wanted to create a perfectly accurate master copy, I would have used canvas as well. However, I already had some wood panels at home and wanted to experiment with different surfaces to understand how painting on wood feels. You can buy pre-primed wood panels at fine art stores, but mine was a raw one. That's why I applied 3 layers of gesso to make it less absorbent, sanding each layer to achieve a smooth surface. Before applying the gesso, I probably should have used animal glue though, but I didn't think of it at the time and didn't have any at home. Do you know if this step is strictly necessary? Let me know if you do. In any case, if you don't want to take risks, just use canvas. For me, this was about experimentation, as I said before. You can prepare your canvas or panel before starting the drawing. The important thing is that it's completely dry by the time you start painting. Acrylic gesso, in any case, dries very quickly and you can speed up the process using a hairdryer. Once the panel was dry, I had to decide whether to apply a colored ground. If you decide to do so and you do it after, you risk covering the transfer, and that's exactly what happened to me the first time. So I traced the drawing, applied a light burnt umber ground, and completely lost the transfer. So I had to trace it again over the color surface. Mistakes like this are part of experimenting, and I hope that by watching this video you can avoid some of the ones I made. For the transfer, I used a blue ballpoint pen to ensure the tip was sharp enough to clearly transfer the lines. I specifically chose blue so I could easily distinguish it from graphite and see clearly which lines had already been transferred and which hadn't. After tracing the first few lines, always check whether the transfer is working correctly. You never know if the pigment is transferring properly or if the pressure you're applying is sufficient, and it's better to check early than to trace everything only to discover that nothing transferred. After checking the transfer, I realized that the ball pen was too aggressive for my wood panel, or possibly for the preparation I used. Can you see that it literally left some engravings on it? Luckily, it wasn't so visible anymore after I applied paint, but it wasn't something fun to discover, so make sure to test this carefully after the first few lines. And now that the transfer is complete, we finally reached the first painting stage. Yay! As I mentioned earlier, I primed the surface with a light layer of burnt umber. This gives me a mid-tone base for the grisaille. The first painting stage is indeed a grisaille, which is just a monochromatic layer that establishes values before applying color. For me, it acts like a map that will guide you through the later layers. Essentially, it's drawing with a brush, and the rule remains the same: work from dark values toward light ones. I will never be tired of repeating this. Since the background was going to be black anyway, I didn't worry too much about making it very dark at this stage, and I focused more on the figure. The better this stage is, the easier the following layers will be. Remember this, so make sure you really work properly on this stage. For this step, I only use the drying medium, turpentine in my case. In my practice overall, I don't use any complex or fancy mediums, just turpentine and oil. Feel free to adapt this to your own preferences, always respecting the fat over lean rule. At this stage, the paint is very diluted and watery. There's no need for impasto here, so don't be afraid to thin the paint significantly. The grisaille was a very common step for painters in the past and is still extremely useful, especially for layered paintings. Among David's unfinished works that I saw in Paris, there were visible grisailles, so this was clearly a step he didn't skip. In my grisaille, I mostly used burnt umber, interacting with white only in the lightest areas, while I believe David used more of a reddish tone like an oxide red, which I don't own, so I work with the closest alternative that I had. The next phase is the color phase finally, which can only begin though once the grisaille is fully dry. With a drying medium like turpentine, this usually takes a couple of days, but it obviously depends on how much turpentine you put, how much pigment there is, on the type of color you use, so make sure by touching the painting or looking at it if it is completely dry before putting colors. Only then you can start layering colors, and I'll never stop repeating it, always work from dark to light, you already know the formula. In this painting, the separation between light and shadow is quite clear. And I try to think in terms of 4 main value groups: the darks, the dark midtones, the light midtones, and the highlights. Based on David's reference, I started with a grayish skin tone for the shadow areas, keeping the layer very transparent just as he did. The dark and midtones were mostly left untouched, letting the grisaille do its job. For the color stage, I used a medium made half turpentine and half oil. I then moved on to the lighter midtones, using colors closer to actual skin tones. To mix them, I used burnt umber, burnt sienna, Naples yellow, and warm white. I use Michael Harding paints, which are my absolute favorites. I don't know the exact mixture that David used to create skin tones, and if you do, please let me know. This is simply the palette I normally use for the skin tones. It's not the only correct one, obviously, and every artist has their own recipe, and this one just works well for me. What is your mixture? And the more we move toward the light, the thicker the paint becomes. This is another general rule that consistently works. The transition from transparency to thickness can vary widely, but looking at David's paintings, while he started very transparently, he rarely used heavy impasto. The thickest paint appears only in small highlights, often applied with pure oil or even without any medium at all. And I left the background for the final step to avoid accidentally dirtying the skin tones or light colors of the turban with the black I was using. And here we are with the final result. I'm very proud with how it came out at the end, but mostly I'm very proud of all the things that I managed to learn with this master copy, the transparent darks and thicker lights, which I really love. Moreover, by studying every brushstroke that David put in this frame of the die Marat, I realized that he painted way more loosely than I normally thought, at least in this painting. Look at the eyes, they are literally some lines with transparent background over which he layers some lighter midtones to create volume. But also I thought, what could have I improved in this master copy besides the mistakes I already told you about throughout the video? I could have definitely worked better in transitions. For example, look at this shoulder. Here the transition between the light and the shadow is not progressive at all, but it's very neat, and it's something that I don't like that much. So I definitely need to work on transitions more, and I'm aware that in general, not only for this master copy. But overall, considering this was my very first master copy, I'm very satisfied with the result. I really want to do more of this in the future. I would love to do the Judith by Caravaggio. I don't know if you know that painting, but it's one of my very much favorite ones. And it's useful to do master copies by different artists to learn all the master secrets. I think it's one of the quickest and most useful ways to learn. Have you ever done master copies, and which one has taught you the most? Please let me know in the comments, because maybe I will consider doing them. I also hope that this video was useful, so if that was the case, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!